Hi, our topic in this presentation is the evolution of ransomware in Latin America, but first let us introduce ourselves. I am Fernando Acosta. Right now I'm the head of the CITUM CERT. I have been in cybersecurity for a while. My specializations are oriented to the investigation and response of incidents. As a hobby, I like trekking on the weekends to enjoy the nature that is near the city I live in.
Hi, my name is Imelda. I'm the head of the cyber intelligence unit at C Labs. I have been in the business for more than 10 years. In my free time, I love learning about human behavior, and I consider myself a foodie.
Before the agenda, let us tell you why we select this topic. Before the Q3 of 2019, the impact of ransomware in LATAM was important, but the number of victims with a big impact was low. But after this quarter, I mean the third quarter of 2019, we saw quite a few victims that started to report a deep impact in their operation and in the loss of information. At the same time, we have seen that most of the victims have an old reference of the impact of the ransomware and sometimes an obsolete way to approach the response. For example, many of them didn't believe they could have exfiltrated data and didn't have a backup to recover their Active Directory. So this is why we would like to show you what we have seen in the battlefield when a victim and us approach a ransomware attack. And let us show you the agenda.
Basically, what we want to tell you about is a timeline of the attacks in the region, how the ransomware is behaving, what are the TTPs that we are observing, and we are also want to tell you about the challenges that we are experiencing and some recommendations from the field. It is important for us to come clean and let you know that this is our vision. Everything that you will see in the presentation is based solely in our telemetry. We complement it with some information coming from our cyber ecosystem and also coming from open sources. Let's go directly to the timeline. What is important to know is that all events in the timeline were high-profile victims, and in all cases, critical information was encrypted, and sometimes stolen prior encryption. As we can see, before the Q4 of 2019, the important events were sporadic. Also, we can see that after Q3 of 2019, there was a renewed preference to also look to government infrastructure. We can see also that some occurrences happen as if they came in waves. At the same time, in Latin America, we are observing more revolt that we did observe it in the past. Mr. Deck, for example, which is not really popular ransomware around the world, it's becoming really, really popular in Mexico, or it was really popular in the Q4 of 2019, for example. Cases like Doppelpaymer and Maze, and they focus only in government victims in the region, while they focus on different sectors around the world. Specifically, some cases like Medusa Locker and Revolt have been observed having a pattern, really interesting one. For example, they attack a financial company and a manufacturing sector exactly at the same time, using exactly the same sample. So Medusa Locker and also Revolt are work in ransomware as a service model. So it is believed that the attacker behind those attacks should be avoiding spending more money in new samples. So it uses the same one at the same time with two different companies from different sectors. So in that way, it is likely that nobody is going to detect that, and they won't share indicators of compromise or things like that. So what is new really about the ransomware? In the cases that we have observed. First of all, in some cases where ransomware as a service is employed, it looks as if the payment is not the main objective. Maybe it could be exfiltration or information, or it could be just the way to erase their tracks. However, these cyber actors are not really seeing any monetization of the ransomware attacks, for example, against government. So if government doesn't pay, it means in that they must have another motivation to execute those attacks, because across Latin America, no one of the countries has been known for paying ransomware when it attacks a government institution. Something that we also see is that tax and legal information was targeted during the attacks. For example, in some cases, the cyber actors steal this information prior to encryption, and in other cases, they only encrypt that information. That must be because for many companies, it is really difficult to justify to the IRS or a similar organization in their country that they don't have how to prove they spend money, and they can start having trouble with taxes. So it is believed that the attackers already noticed that it is the kind of information that the companies really care about. So that's why they are focusing on this one more. We are also seeing that the persistence of the malware is stronger than it was in the past. For example, when responding to an incident, the victims need to take additional steps to eradicate the intrusion and to verify it.
So, as incident response, what does that mean about the finance and tax and legal information? What this means for us is that victims should have an incident response roadmap that integrates some financial and legal advisor. And in our side, as IT and security team, we must have a specialized way to manage and detect of what is being exported to internet. Because if this is an exfiltration and we can prevent it, we could prevent sometimes some ransom actions because they usually happen after the exfiltration. So if we respond on the exfiltration, we can also prevent the ransom.
But when talking about the pandemic, how really changed ransomware during this time, what we can say about that we observed is that of the whole universe of attacks, most of them were related to phishing and fraud during the pandemic, especially phishing that was trying to get financial information, personal information. And the ransomware was still there, but was not the primary kind of attack that we observed. So it wasn't a trend, it wasn't happening all the time. However, phishing and fraud was a constant kind of attack that we observed in all of the organizations. Talking about the number of attacks related to the healthcare system, while in many places like US and UK, some healthcare organizations were suffering from ransomware attacks. That is something that didn't occur in the region. None in Mexico and none other countries were known for having issues related to attacks against healthcare organizations. So this can be related that in Latin America, there are no strong laws against the stolen information or that confidential information related to healthcare patients becomes public, like it is in the US and it is in other countries in Europe, for example. We also see that with the ransomware and during the pandemic, the cases that occurred, in the cases that occurred, the response was slower because during the incidents, many of the victims didn't have an EDR solution because it is difficult for many organizations still to get it in the region. So if you want to try to respond fast to an event during this time, it becomes really complex because you depend of the availability of the sysadmin and the availability of the possible victim, and you also depend of how how tech savvy is the end user to provide you some information. So it becomes difficult and slower to respond during an incident in general during the pandemic. We also observed that in many cases, the ransomware families that were attacking in the region used RDP, vulnerable RDP and vulnerable SMB services to get into the organization. And the number of RDP and SMB and many other ports open happened because the IT people decided that it is better to expose an RDP and make sure their business people is working properly from home instead of taking care of the security and having trouble during the execution of the regular services.
So about TTPs, let's talk first about the initial access. We have seen a lot of threat intelligence that points the initial access to phishing. But even though we have found evidence about this, we have seen that many victims also have exposed services that are being exploited during the ransom attack, and they were having access to it. We have seen that phishing attacks is a method that is easy to blame, and everybody can fall on a phishing attack. But it's not easy to demonstrate the exact phishing email that was successful in the attack. On the exposed services, we have seen the connections, we have seen the first access, and not only on RDP, we also have seen found SMB services that even the client doesn't know why they have these services exposed, because they shouldn't. And it's not only about being aware or being unaware of the service they are exposing, but it's about that they firmly believe that they don't have any of these services exposed to the internet. It's about having a wrong perspective about what they are really sharing to the internet. And that's kind of scary. And also what we have seen, and this is quite interesting, we have seen some kind of behavior when the threat it's really quiet. The threat that has some intrusion and it tries to end on a ransom, and the threat is really quiet, and they try to work with leaving of the land tools until they start a ransom, and then they get noisy. But the evidence they leave before is quite subtle. Some of the leaving of the land tools that the threats tend to use are for executing scripting, are for elevating privileges, and in this case, like proc dump, they are using for dumping passwords of users that are already logged on the endpoints. But in contrast, we have seen a lot of threats that where they use a huge number of tools, even some tools that look redundant between them. They generate a lot of noise, and this causes a lot the logs to rotate quite often, and so it's hard to get evidence of what happened several days before because the events are rotated and stuff like that. But I must clarify that not all the tools that they download are malware or hacking tools. They are also downloading other kind of tools. And here we can see some of the tools they download or they tend to download. Some of them, like Bloodhound, are to map the Active Directory tree. Some of them are to have lateral movement in between the endpoints, and some of them they have additional actions. For example, Airclone is used to exfiltrate information in cloud storage solutions, but it's not a hacking tool, it's not an admin tool, it's just a tool to share information to cloud storage solutions. And we must clarify that they also use living of the land tools. On the encryption actions that we have seen, and when we were looking for some evidence, what we have found out is that it's always a good idea to look for evidence on Windows folders, because since the malware tend to keep this folder untouched, the attacker tends to upload their scripts and artifacts on it. So it's always a good idea to look for files that have less than 3 weeks in this folder. Just remember that when you are looking for these files, you may be getting good noise about Windows Update files and stuff like that. And it's also a good idea to look for new folders that are on the root of the C drive. And what we have been seeing on the distribution and the triggering is that we have found that they use basically two ways. They have two ways to spread the malware. The first one is to run a scheduled task that tries to run all the ransom on all the machines at the same time. This way is really fast, but not always hit the mark on all the machines, but because some machines could be inaccessible or didn't run the script in a right way. But the other way they use is to add the script on the group policy actions. We have found that this method, even though it does infect the machines in a slower way, if you want to stop the spread of the infection, you have to follow specific steps to avoid hitting the group policy action. And this means a slower way to recover.
So who is who in ransomware? For what we have seen over the time is that many families are really specialized. They have really sophisticated designers behind. But what is also observed that most of them or all of them use living of the land tools and techniques. But also we can see that they tend to exfiltrate, most of them tend to exfiltrate information prior to the encryption. And I mean, for most of them, I refer to the ones that work in ransomware as a service model, because in the case of RUR and Doppelpaymer, they don't handle ransomware as a service model, and they also steal information prior encrypting. We have observed that specifically with Doppelpaymer. And for example, the paymer is one of the ones that most care about tax and legal information that we talked before. We also observe when comparing these families that almost all of them try to use GPO to distribute the ransomware through the network. So also it is observed that in some cases they affect all sectors, and the only one that focuses on one sector is a snake.
So here we would like to share you some common ideas that could help you to avoid some basic mistakes. And we have divided on what is a good idea and what were the mistakes that we have seen. sometimes on the incident response. So what's a good idea?
A good idea is to focus on the solution, for example.
But what's a bad idea? The bad idea is to follow the blame game. We have found that some IT administration that lose focus on the incident response course, and sometimes even before they start fixing the problem, they want to prove they did everything right, or that someone did a mistake, and that is a bad idea because the first moments of an intrusion or on this kind of incidents is crucial, and sometimes the team loses the most precious minutes and sometimes hours that should be used understanding how the ransom was triggered and how to contain the spread of the attack in something that is worthless. So what's a good idea?
A good idea, for example, is verify the backups before getting back online again.
So what's a bad idea? A bad idea is to restore from backups that are already compromised. So what happens here is that sometimes when a victim is in a ransom attack, he has a big hurry to fix everything that at the fastest possible way. But sometimes the victim ignore that some intrusions have been inside the network for more than 2 or 3 weeks. Sometimes they are in the network for several months. So it's pretty important that after you restore a backup of any endpoints, please verify if the endpoint doesn't have any indications that it could be that if to verify if it's still compromised. So what's a good idea?
A good idea is quickly check if the domain controller has GPOs that could be distributing the ransomware.
So what's a bad idea? A bad idea could be to follow a procedure to verify if the system is compromised, but at doing so, you are triggering the GPOs that will encrypt it. What we have seen here is that sometimes the victim wants to know what's the level of the damage, and they try to verify how many endpoints are encrypted. But if you're not verifying how the GPOs are triggering the events of encrypting, maybe by logging in the endpoints, you are triggering the encryption. So it's really, really important to understand the GPOs and the distributing and the triggering the ransom before you start to act and you start to verify how much you are infected. So what's a good idea?
A good idea is collecting evidence or make a backup before reinstalling a compromised system, for example.
So what's a bad idea? The bad idea is that if you are in a hurry, lose evidence or information still recover when reinstalling a compromised system. What we have seen here is that sometimes the victim is in a really hurry to get everything online and getting everything running again. And when doing so, it's important that if the asset of was a key factor of the intrusion, or if it's used to have important information, or if it was an asset that it was important in the operation, it is pretty it's necessary and it's a good idea to consider making a backup at least of the critical evidence before reinstalling. Maybe you won't back up everything, but you will need to back up some evidence about this, and this will help you maybe to because you can verify if prior events relate to the new ones, and it will also help you to know what was the level to show what was the level of the compromise data and stuff like that that could help you in a retrospective analysis. And there's always a small chance that if you do a full backup, there's always a small chance that the ransomware private key could get public sometime in the future. Maybe now it's a really, really small chance of happening, but still it could be useful someday. So what are the challenges that we are facing on LATAM? The first challenge that we face a lot is the lack of home-based telemetry. Many organizations receive IOCs and attack tendencies that are produced by telemetry from vendors that don't have a huge coverage on the LATAM region. And this information is based because it's not based in the vendor visibility. It's based on the vendor visibility only. So the organizations believe that if the vendor reports that the security incidents only occurred in Europe, it means that only Europe is being attacked, while in reality, the same time of attack could be happening in different parts of the world, including LATAM. But it's just that the vendor didn't have the visibility in this continent. Another challenge that we have faced is the isolated IOCs. And what we mean is that we have found many threat intelligence sources that share a lot of IOCs without any context. For example, you can find a source with a lot of hashes of an APT campaign, but this source never tells you these hashes are for downloaders, these hashes are for keyloggers, these hashes are for command and control, etc. So they don't even tell you which MD5 hash correspond to the same file of which SHA hash. So that keeps the incident handler guessing or investigating what the threat intelligence really found. And to be clear, a lot of information is great for detection. If you have a lot of information, that's great for detection. But if you don't have any context, when you are responding an incident, there will be a lot of duplicated work and a lot of precious time lost just in the investigation. So many information won't be that useful. It will be useful, but it won't be that useful that as useful as it could be. Another challenge that we have that this region have faced is the different maturity in a victim. When an organization has an infrastructure in different countries, it's really complex that they follow the same security and IT rules because the cultural changes that they have, and sometimes they are several companies of a parent company. So this translates to different maturity in each region or in each company, and a low level of visibility between them. That makes company vulnerable to more attack types or techniques because maybe one company is vulnerable of something and other company is have a service exposed that it shouldn't, and so there are more open more holes where it could be exploited, and the company is less ready to respond because they don't know what the other one, the problems that the other company or the other region has. And another challenge that we have faced is the comparison between AV and EDR. We have found that many IT people are still comparing the antivirus with an EDR, and on incident response, we think that this is quite far from true, because when you are responding an incident, you must have context information of what happened before and after something is detected. You must get additional information of what is the state and the behavior of a machine in a specific moment. And you must get which endpoint have the same behavior than others. And also, when detecting an intrusion, not everything is malware. So this is something where the antivirus solutions tend to fall short, and it's important to understand the difference, that the organizations understand the difference between antivirus and EDRs. And another challenge that we have found is the excessive trust in complex passwords. What we have seen is that a lot of people get shocked when attackers know that the password, that they get shocked because they found the attacker got their passwords, because it was really complex how it happened. But as IT people, we must understand that the password complexity only helps for some kind of attacks, for some brute forces, for some dictionary attacks, sorry. But there are many other ways to get the password or to bypass the need of a password. So to have complex passwords is good, but it's not enough.
And also, we have a big challenge in the region because they believe that ransomware is coming. It is coming in some way, but they are not really aware of, they don't believe the ransomware is actually here, because Latin America has a record of experiencing attacks. At least 2 weeks later, they are announced publicly. So it is important to know, or it is important to recommend to small or medium organizations especially, that they should have in place a ransomware backup plan, or a backup plan based on the organization affected by ransomware, for example. However, what is for sure is, if a ransomware attack is not taken seriously, the company can have issues and later not being able to provide anything else. So this false belief that it is not something that is going to happen to me as an organization, well, the key here is timing. They are every organization can be a target, but the attackers are not really focusing in those kind of victims, so they will have more interest in attacking those ones that can represent a financial institution and a manufacturing organization that we saw before. But the case with Travelex makes everybody to evaluate how a ransomware attack it can have an impact over the organization. That's the case why Travelex just was declaring itself in bankruptcy. So, and also we saw last year that a case where a company laid off more than 300 people because it was victim of a ransomware, and they were not able to pay. They were able to recover from the ransomware, even after they paid for the ransom and recovering the key. For the time they have the decryption key, they already have financial issues that they were not able to overcome. So ransomware is not coming, ransomware is here. So, talking about recommendations, as we have, as a community, we have been hearing over and over again that the same recommendations. But it's really interesting when the attackers really validate that those are good recommendations. This is a screenshot of the conversation between CWT that was published in many media outlets. And it is really funny how the attacker told the company that it was a great pleasure to do business, but also he says that he's going to provide some recommendations to avoid the company happen for something similar in the future. So, but when you see their recommendations, you see that they say that even in some cases, an app blocker can destroy the operation. So here we can see that following the best practices pays off, because because at least having a way to protect the information that is more valuable, the companies are going to be in a better place. And if they have a good cybersecurity strategy and at least basic security hygiene, it is likely that for the company won't be a victim like in the way that it happened to CWT.
So, what are our recommendations? First, we want to recommend to use a multi-factor authentication. And this is because one of the first actions in an intrusion is the exfiltration of the passwords. So it's important to have an additional control for accessing the operating system and all the services possible, especially if those services are on the Active Directory, but all the services possible. Another recommendation is to use offline backups. There are still IT specialists who thinks that remote availability storage could be a backup, but a real backup should have information offline and a set of versions that you could use to recover in different states. Another recommendation for the response is to have a good threat intelligence, because in an incident, we need to have actionable intelligence that could help us to investigate and act in a fast way. And of course, the threat intelligence should be TTP oriented. Another recommendation is to use some kind of DLP solutions to try to detect exfiltration. It's important to detect exfiltration indicators because many ransomware attacks do exfiltrate, as we saw before, and sometimes the exfiltration does more damage than the ransom itself. And it's not only about using DLP solutions. It's also the need to have a wider technology for detections, because, for example, there is the need to detect data exfiltration also with other solutions that could verify stuff like protocol tunneling or access to cloud storage, as we saw with our clone. And yes, also it's important to have visibility on the north-south and the east-west, and to block traffic, this kind of traffic, but we also need to monitor the behavior of the network in the endpoints. And it's not only to have the technology it's not only the need of having a technology to detect, but also to have a technology for response. Sometimes we have the idea that a design for detection will help us to respond, but on an incident response, you need to have more information. And also, it's important that to have a way to investigate and orchestrate actions on different security and network solutions. And it's important to have access to all the endpoints to act and investigate this kind of intrusions. And last but not least, we always need a continuous monitoring. It sounds simple, it sounds redundant, but it's not only about alert critical events. It's important to continually aggregate context on the events and alerts, not only on security events, but also on operational events that could tell you if if there is a change in the behavior of the network or on the users or on the endpoints. So I hope these recommendations and this point of view that we share could be useful to you for understand better the attacks of the ransom, but also to understand the evolution and how to respond and how to act in these kinds of problems and how to be ready. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.